My name is Alex, and this is a story I don't want to tell, but I must. You may not believe me, you might laugh or dismiss it, but I know that what happened last year was real. I returned to my parents' house on December 23rd. It was our annual tradition, gathering together at our country house in the mountains of New Hampshire. The tall pines, white carpets of snow, and cozy fireplace always created the perfect Christmas atmosphere. This year, everything was different. My parents decided they needed some warmth and went to Florida. They asked me to join them, but I declined. Honestly, I just wanted to rest after a hard year. Working in Boston had drained me, and I dreamed of a few peaceful days at our family home. The house stood alone in the woods, at the end of a long driveway. In winter, the road was almost always buried under snow, and it felt like you were driving into another world. It was large, built in an early 20th century style, with 2 floors, panoramic windows, and a big fireplace in the living room. When I arrived, the sun was already setting behind the horizon. Golden light slid over the snow-covered trees, and the air was filled with that pleasant silence you can only find in the mountains. I cleared the path to the door, brought in my things, and turned on the lights. The house greeted me with the familiar smell of pinewood furniture and something old. As always, I felt safe here. But this time, there was something else. Subtle, but unsettling. I spent the first evening setting up Christmas decorations. I hung the garlands my mom always used on the windows. I brought the tree we had left in the garage last year and placed it in the corner of the living room. When I finished, the room looked almost perfect, the soft glow of the fireplace, colorful lights on the tree, and a pleasant silence. I made myself some hot chocolate, turned on the old movie Home Alone, and got comfortable on the couch. This was exactly what I wanted. Nothing special, just peace and a bit of Christmas warmth. But around 10 p.m., I heard the first strange sound. A faint knock. It came from the back door leading to the terrace. I thought it was the wind or some animal and paid no attention. A few minutes later, the sound came again. This time, it was clearer. I put my cup down on the table and walked over to the door. Beyond the glass panels, there was only the dark forest and the faint shimmer of snow, illuminated by moonlight. I felt a slight unease creep over me but decided to do nothing. It was probably just the wind. The next morning, December 24th, I woke up feeling chilled. The fireplace had gone out, and the room was cold. I got up to add some firewood and noticed a box sitting on the porch. I opened the door. A small box, wrapped in red paper, with a golden bow on top. I looked around, searching for tracks in the snow, but there was nothing. No footprints, no tire marks. It was strange. I brought the box inside and set it on the table. 2 feelings wrestled within me, curiosity and unease. What was it? Who could have left it? I tore the paper and opened the lid. A doll. Old, worn, with strange black bead eyes. Something about its expression felt wrong. A chill ran through me, even though I was standing by the fireplace. I couldn't take my eyes off the doll. It was handmade, but it didn't resemble the sweet, cozy toys grandmothers make for their grandchildren. Its black bead eyes seemed to stare directly at me, and its mouth was slightly crooked, as if frozen in a sinister smile. Around its neck hung a small plaque made of thin metal. One word was etched on it. "I'm cold." This baffled me. What was that supposed to mean? I carefully placed the doll back into the box, closed the lid tightly, and decided not to think about it until morning. But things didn't go as planned. That night, I couldn't sleep. It felt like the house had a life of its own. Faint creaking came from the walls, and the fireplace in the living room crackled softly. I told myself it was just the usual sounds of an old house, but every rustle made me uneasy. Around 3 in the morning, a sharp noise woke me up. It sounded like something had fallen to the floor. I quickly turned on the light and scanned the room. The doll, which had been tucked away in the box, was now lying on the floor near the fireplace. I froze, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe I hadn't closed the box properly, and it fell out? But something about it felt wrong. I picked up the doll, placed it back in the box, and carried it out to the garage. You won't bother me anymore, I said to myself. But I was wrong. In the morning, I was woken up by a knock at the door. I looked at the clock. It was 7:15. Who could be here so early? I walked to the front door and peered through the peephole. No one. I opened the door, and once again, there was a box on the doorstep. Exactly like the one from yesterday, but this time it was wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. My hand trembled as I opened it. Inside was a piece of paper folded several times. It read, "Open the door. We are waiting." I stepped out onto the porch and carefully looked around. The snow was untouched, no tracks anywhere. I checked the perimeter of the house but found nothing unusual. That was the final straw. I called the police. 2 hours later, a police car pulled into the driveway. The officer, a short man with thick eyebrows and a tired expression, listened to my story attentively, nodding as I spoke. "This looks like someone's prank," he said when I showed him the boxes. "Maybe local teenagers. Stuff like this happens often in places like this. But there are no tracks." I objected. "How is that possible?" He shrugged. "Snow can sometimes cover tracks quickly. If you see anything else, give us a call." I wasn't satisfied with his explanation, but I decided not to argue. The police inspected the house, found nothing, and left. That night, I decided to sleep with a knife under my pillow. But sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made me jump. The forest outside the windows seemed darker, and the house felt alien, almost hostile. Around midnight I heard it. Heavy, slow footsteps. They were coming from above me. Someone was walking on the roof. I grabbed the knife and a flashlight. The footsteps stopped the moment I got out of bed, but the sense of presence lingered. I walked to the window and looked outside. A few yards from the house I saw them. 3 figures. Tall, unnaturally thin, with long arms that nearly touched the ground. They stood among the trees, just staring at the house. I abruptly closed the curtains, feeling the cold seep through my clothes. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I rushed to the garage to check the box with the doll. But when I opened the door, the box was empty. The doll was standing in the middle of the garage, its head tilted, and its beaded eyes seemed to stare directly at me. I realized I was not alone in this house. It wasn't just isolation or loneliness. Something was watching me, something was playing with me. I burned the doll in the fireplace, but that night, I understood that this was only the beginning. The next day passed in a strange tension. The sun was shining brightly, but it didn't bring any relief. The snow in the yard sparkled under the sunlight, and at first glance, everything seemed normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided to do something to regain control of the situation. First, I checked all the doors and windows, locking them as tightly as I could. Then I walked around the house, observing the tracks in the snow. The bare footprints I had seen before were still by the back door, but there were no new tracks. Everything seemed empty. Too empty. Around noon, I decided to call my friend Jacob. He had always been a skeptic and didn't believe in anything paranormal. If anyone could help me make sense of the situation, it was him. "Hey, Alex," he said, answering the call. "How's your lonely Christmas going? I need your help," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. "Something happened? It all started yesterday. Strange boxes, strange sounds. I don't know how to explain it, but something's not right here." Jacob was silent for a few seconds before responding. "Alex, it's just an old cabin in the middle of the woods. There's always going to be noise, creaks. Calm down. And the tracks in the snow?" I interrupted. "Bare tracks, Jake. No shoes. And the boxes, they just appear." His voice became more serious. "All right, I'll come to you tomorrow. But buddy, just relax. It could be a prank. Or you've worked yourself up too much." I took a deep breath and agreed. I needed someone else to see all of this. But until tomorrow, I was on my own. As evening approached, I started preparing dinner. A roasted turkey steak and some vegetables, nothing special, but it gave me a brief distraction. While I was cleaning up after cooking, I heard a familiar sound. A knock. Light, almost cautious, but this time it came not from the door, but from the kitchen window. I turned around and saw it. The box. It was sitting right on the windowsill outside, wrapped in black paper with a red ribbon. How did it get there? The window was closed and locked, and the snow beneath it was completely undisturbed. I opened the window, trembling hands grabbing the box, and placed it on the table. My breath was quick, and I tried to calm myself. Each of these gifts was becoming more and more terrifying. Inside there was a photograph. An old black and white picture, where I recognized our house. But it was strange, the house looked completely different, as if it had been taken many decades ago. In front of it stood 3 people. They were all dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and their faces were blurred. But what frightened me the most, one of them was holding the same doll I had burned. That night, I heard the sounds again. Creaking, light footsteps, but what troubled me the most was something else. They were getting closer. It was clear that these guests weren't just standing in the woods. They were slowly, but surely, approaching the house. Around 3 o'clock, I heard something heavy fall onto the roof. I didn't have the courage to go and look. I just sat in the living room, holding the knife in my hands, watching the shadows from the fire dance on the walls. But then I heard a voice. It was raspy and cold, coming from the door. "Open the door. We know you're home." I could barely breathe. My body froze, and I didn't dare move. The voice wasn't human. It carried an emptiness, something dead in it. The next day, Jacob arrived. His SUV parked by the house, and I literally ran out to meet him. He stepped out, smiling, but his expression changed when he saw how I looked. "Alex, have you not slept at all? You have to see this," I said, pulling him into the house. I showed him the boxes, the photograph, the footprints. He looked confused, but he was trying to stay calm. "Listen," he started, examining the photograph. "This is all really strange. But maybe there's a rational explanation? The neighbors could have..." "There are no neighbors," I interrupted. "No one could have left these boxes." Jacob fell silent, and we were left in the quiet. But then we heard it. A knock. The back door. Jacob grabbed a stick he found by the door, and we cautiously approached. He opened the door with a sharp motion, but there was no one there. Just another box. Jacob bent down to pick up the box. It was wrapped in matte black paper with a golden ribbon. When he touched it, his hand trembled. "It's colder than it should be," he muttered, looking at me. "What?" I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "The box. It feels like it's just come out of a freezer." We brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. Jacob carefully examined it, as if expecting a spring-loaded toy to jump out. I stood nearby, holding a knife. "Should we open it?" he asked. "Maybe that's a bad idea." I heard my voice shake. "Alex, we can't just leave it here." Jacob untied the ribbon and slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a mirror. Small, round, with a metal frame. Etched into its surface were the words, "Look at yourself." I didn't want to touch the mirror, but Jacob leaned in to inspect it more closely. In that moment, his eyes widened and his face turned pale. "What do you see?" I asked. This is wrong, Alex. It's not my reflection." I looked into the mirror. Instead of our reflection, I saw a dark room, where beneath a low ceiling, the same 3 figures I had seen in the forest were standing. Their long arms hung down, and their heads swayed slowly, as if to the rhythm of some inaudible song. I threw the mirror to the floor. It shattered, but at the same time, we heard it. A scream. Loud, desperate, it seemed to come from deep within the house. "What was that?" Jacob whispered. "They're here," I replied, watching as the room seemed to darken. The lights began to flicker. We could hear something moving within the walls of the house. The noise was everywhere, creaking, knocking, sounds that resembled scratching. It's just the house, an old house. Jacob tried to reassure himself. But I knew that wasn't true. What was happening was beyond our understanding. Suddenly, the fire in the fireplace went out, leaving us in almost complete darkness. We grabbed flashlights and started to move through the house. Jacob tried to make jokes, but his voice sounded broken. Maybe it's just wildlife, squirrels or raccoons. Squirrels don't leave boxes with mirrors, Jake. I decided we needed to check the forest. It seemed like a stupid idea, but something told me we had to step outside the house. We put on warm jackets, grabbed our knives and flashlights, and headed toward the trees. The snow crunched beneath our feet, and the darkness of the forest was thick as ink. The flashlights gave off weak beams of light, which felt powerless against the surrounding darkness. We walked in silence, but the feeling that we were being watched grew stronger. "Do you feel that?" Jacob asked, stopping. "What do you mean?" "The cold. But not the kind from the snow. It's something else." I felt it too. The air had become heavy, almost suffocating, even though the temperature was low. We walked a few more yards, and then we saw it. Among the trees, in a place where the snow lay undisturbed, stood something resembling an altar. A tall stone, covered with a thin layer of ice, and on it, another box. We moved closer. The box was wrapped in dark green paper with white lines resembling tree branches. It sat right in the center of the altar, as if waiting for us. "Alex, let's get out of here," Jacob said. No, I felt like I had to find out what was inside. I opened the box. Inside was a note. It read, "This is your home, but we are the masters here." My heart began to race. In that moment, we heard footsteps behind us. We turned around, but saw nothing. Just the empty forest and the shadows of the trees. We returned to the house, feeling as though we were being watched. When we entered and locked the door, Jacob said, "Alex, we need to leave. Leave everything and go right now." "I can't," I replied, looking him in the eyes. "If I leave, it won't stop." "What do you mean?" "This house, it's not just a house. Something's always been here. And now it's showing itself." Jacob sighed and sat down on the couch. We sat in silence until we heard a new sound. It wasn't a knock or footsteps. It was a whisper. "They're in the house," Jacob whispered. The whisper came from everywhere. It was soft, but impossible to ignore. It seemed to penetrate through the walls, filling the space between us and leaving a cold sensation in the air. The words were indistinct, as if several voices were speaking at once, but one of them came through clearly. "You have to leave." Jacob jumped off the couch, gripping the stick he had brought from the forest. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with terror. "What the hell is happening here, Alex?" he shouted. This can't be real. Calm down." I tried to convince him, but even my own voice trembled. "If we panic, it will only get worse." I knew the whisper wasn't just a sound. It was alive. It was part of whatever was controlling these strange events. The whisper suddenly stopped, leaving behind an emptiness. But it didn't last long. We heard heavy footsteps coming from the second floor. It sounded like something large and awkward was moving through the room above us. "I'm going up there," Jacob said, but I grabbed his arm. "Are you out of your mind? We need to stay here. Together. If we don't do something, this won't stop." His voice was louder than necessary. But he broke free from my grip and ran toward the stairs. I couldn't leave him alone, so I followed. The footsteps continued. They grew heavier, louder, but stopped when we reached the top floor. The hallway was empty. The doors to all the rooms were open, but darkness filled each one. "Jacob, slow down," I whispered. "Something's not right." We carefully made our way to my old bedroom. When I looked inside, my breath caught. On the bed lay the doll. It was wrapped in black fabric, and its bead eyes gleamed in the light of the flashlight. This can't be," I whispered. "I burned it." "Alex, look!" Jacob shouted, pointing at the wall. On the wall, directly above the bed, were the words. "You won't be able to escape." The words were carved with something sharp. They looked as though they had been written by a trembling hand. Before we could recover from what we had just seen, there was a loud crash from downstairs. It sounded like something heavy had fallen to the floor. We ran downstairs, but before we could reach the living room, the light went out again. "Jacob, where are you?" I shouted into the darkness. "I'm here," he answered from somewhere to my right. "I've got the flashlight." The light from his flashlight flickered, but I could make out his silhouette. We met by the fireplace, trying to figure out what to do next. But then we heard it. The footsteps coming down the stairs. Heavy, slow, but determined. They were getting closer to us, and every sound echoed in my head. I turned toward the door and realized it was open. Cold wind filled the room, and I saw snow drifting inside. "We have to run, now!" Jacob shouted. We ran out of the house, leaving the door wide open. The forest seemed even darker than before. The flashlights illuminated only a few steps ahead of us. We kept running without looking back, but I could feel something following us. "Alex, they're behind us!" Jacob shouted, pointing back. I turned around and saw them. The same 3 figures. They were closer than ever. Their long arms touched the ground, and their movements were smooth and unnaturally fast. We reached the altar we had seen earlier. Jacob suddenly stopped. "What are you doing?" I screamed. "This is the center of it all. This is where they're strongest. We have to keep running." "No! If we leave it here, they'll follow us. They'll always be behind us." The figures were getting closer, and I realized there was no choice. We had to do something. Jacob grabbed the box from the altar and threw it on the ground. Something cracked inside, and at that very moment, the figures stopped. "Fire, Alex! Fire!" I fumbled through my pockets and found a few matches. I lit one, and the box ignited in flames. The darkness around us started to dissipate. The figures froze, then began to retreat. But when the last one disappeared into the forest, I heard the whisper. "This is not the end." We returned to the house, but something had changed. It felt empty. The silence was not the kind that comforts, but the kind that oppresses. Jacob stayed with me until morning, but even when the sun rose, I felt that this night had left a mark that would never fade. Sometimes, I still hear those voices. Sometimes, I feel like I see those figures on the edge of the forest. But now I know one thing: this house is no longer mine. It belongs to them.